facts concerning it in tomorrow's program. But I do have a guest who's joining us right now. He is an investigative journalist. He has a site called WhoWhatWhere.com, and his name is Russ Baker. Russ is, as a matter of fact, Russ is going to be in town tomorrow. I think you're in San Jose right now, aren't you, Russ?
I am. Hi, Pat. Just
Hi.
A couple of things. Sorry, the website is actually Who, What, Why.
I always get that wrong, don't I? Because it's your fault. You should have named it Who, What, Where, When, and Why. Because that's what all journalism students know.
We thought about making it as long as humanly possible, and decided not to.
You could have just abbreviated. You could make it www.dub.
We tried to get that one, too.
That would confuse everybody. But now you're going to be, you're here, you're in San Jose, but you have an appearance tomorrow. You're going to discuss the news you don't get about foreign policy, the economy, and power in America, and how the presidential race obscures why we cannot get real democracy and meaningful change. It's happening at the First Unitarian Universalist Society in San Francisco, which is at 1187 Franklin Street at Geary. It's free. Now, Russ, how are you going to make any money if it's free?
I know. My mother keeps bugging me about this, but you know what the thing is? What can I do? We got to share this stuff. I hope folks will come out. I just arrived, came in from Los Angeles because I live in New York. It's sunny down there, raining here, and I'm just wondering, will people come out tomorrow morning, 9:30 in the morning? Apparently, they're going to give you, as I understand it, some bagels and other stuff for free, and
there
we're going to have a
lively
lively conversation.
Well, yeah, if there's food, people show up for free food.
Yeah, 9:30 tomorrow morning.
Now, Russ's most famous book is Family of Secrets, The Bush Dynasty, America's Invisible Government, and the Hidden History of the Last 50 Years. If you have not read that book, then you don't know the history of the last 50 years. I want to get to some things that are pretty current, but Russ, but I thought we would talk just a little bit about the this auspicious anniversary of the shock and awe in Iraq 9 years ago. 9 years ago. So tell us a little bit about this president who took us to war.
Well, I mean, there are so many things that we don't know, and of course, after all these years, and we still have quite a presence there, we no longer even talk about the place, and we no longer even talk about why the United States went in there in the first place. And it's not just Iraq, of course, it's with Afghanistan, these shifting rationales for going in there. But with Iraq, I mean, one of my personal favorites, and as you know, this is one of many revelations in Family of Secrets, was when I interviewed one of Bush's close confidants, a guy who was working on a book with him back in 1999, and he told me that Bush had told him back in 1999, this is not 2003, 2002, 2001, 1999, that he was, if he got elected president, one of the only things he could think of that he really was looking forward to doing was invading Iraq. And I think it's important that we remind folks about, most people don't even know that at all, but that this, of course, never came out in the corporate media.
And the rationale for that invasion, the rationale for shock and awe, it was all garbage. It was all BS, and it was tied to so many. And there really were some varying rationales that were given, but one that seemed to stick with a lot of Americans was that Saddam Hussein was somehow connected to the 9/11 attacks. Then of course, we talked about the weapons of mass destruction and all that sort of thing. But the 9/11 connection was something it seemed like Dick Cheney continued to cling to and continued to evoke. Now, you've got a story that's fairly recent. I think you first published this September of last year, where you don't connect Iraq to 9/11, but you do connect the Saudis. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and by the way, just set up for that. A lot of folks say, "Oh yeah, well we know about that, Michael Moore's movie, and they let these Saudis leave the country rather than the FBI interviewing them." But this is not that story. This is a much, I think, more profound story. Back in I don't know how much detail you want to go into, but basically in 2001, shortly before the 9/11 attacks, a Saudi couple with small children living in a gated community just outside Sarasota, Florida, disappeared. And the neighbors, I guess, noticed their neighbor that they weren't there, but didn't think anything of it until after the attacks, when they learned that a majority of the hijackers were Saudis. And then suddenly they thought, oh, that's weird. Our neighbors are Saudi, and we haven't seen them in 2 weeks. And they notified the security authorities at this gated community, who then contacted the federal authorities, and then the house was entered, and they found the house essentially untouched, a new PT Cruiser in the driveway, a car in the garage, clothes throughout the house, everything there, all the furnishings, fruit on the table, diapers out and so forth. It looked like they were living there, but they weren't. They were gone. And they'd apparently left in a great hurry. They'd opened a safe and taken the contents and left the safe door open and taken one computer and left another. And so there was an investigation. And the investigation, we are told, concluded that the people living in this house had connections either directly by visits, according to the gate records, or by triangulation of phone calls to 11 of the 19 hijackers. Now, that, of course, is an astonishing story, because that would suggest some kind of a command and control relationship between the people in the house and the people who, we are told at least, were on those planes that went into the Twin Towers and the Pentagon and so forth. And so this is a fascinating story. It is one you will not hear in the mainstream media at all. It is one that was covered up. The FBI was swarming that complex, and then nothing appeared. Nothing came out in 2001. In fact, nothing has ever come out on this. And Senator Graham, former Senator Graham of Florida, who was the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee and also chaired the congressional inquiry into 9/11, he said he was astonished by this. He said the FBI withheld this information from them. He thought this was perhaps the most conclusive break in the whole story. And if you'd like, I mean, I'll stop now, but if you'd like, I can tell you more about that.
Well, there's also connection to the Saudi royals, right?
Right. Well, that's the second half of the story. So then what we do on our website, again, whowhatwhy.com, and this story is up on the right-hand column of the site, right under Original Investigations, right there at the top. Then what we do is we try to figure out, well, who's this family? I mean, that obviously seems to be the question to ask. And so we research them, and what we find is that they are connected at the highest levels of the Saudi royal family, and that, in fact, they left this house in a great hurry. The father of the couple who lived there working directly as one of the top employees, I mean, corporate executive of the company owned by one of the most powerful Saudi princes, and that this family fled, returned to Saudi Arabia, and took up positions in these companies, never went back to their house, never collected their belongings, just left it there. And so who is this Saudi prince? Well, very interestingly, he is one of two Saudi princes, he and his cousin, who really are the ones who pushed for Saudis to become pilots in the first place. They pushed for the training principally in South Florida. In fact, this particular prince was, I believe, the first of the Saudi princes to himself come and train right in that same area where Mohammed Atta and all these others, we are told, trained. So this is, of course, a tremendously significant story. Really, by all rights, if you just talk about significance, should have been a global headline, should have been the head of the top of the news everywhere, all over the country.
And should have sparked a major investigation to determine if there was any involvement by the Saudi royals in the plotting of 9/11. I mean, because that would be an act of war.
Right. Right. And so, you know, a lot of people, it's very interesting, and, you know, one of the, I guess the basic credo of whowhatwhy.com is pure journalism, that we don't go in with an axe to grind or an agenda. We're not taking sides on these things. We just want to know what actually happened. And so we get the people in the establishment who don't want to hear any of this, and they just, you know, tune it out. And then we get the people who are big 9/11 buffs who are unhappy with this because they believe it was somebody else who was involved. And
right.
We're not saying who was involved, but you can't ignore this story.
You can't ignore the
stuff.
You can't ignore the information. Russ, hang on with me. We're going to take a little break here. We'll come back and we'll continue our discussion. Russ Baker is my guest. His website is whowhatwhy.com, whowhatwhy.com, and it's investigative journalism website. I'm Pat Thurston. 808-0810 is our number, by the way. You're listening to KGO.
Being audited by the IRS or state is serious.
Good evening. I'm Pat Thurston. Russ Baker is my guest. He's an investigative journalist. He runs the site WhoWhatWhy.com. His book, Family of Secrets, is incredible, horrifying, disturbing, and enlightening. It's Family of Secrets, The Bush Dynasty, America's Invisible Government and the Hidden History of the Last 50 Years. And it's not, as the title would tell you, it's not just about the George W. Bush administration. It goes way back. And a lot of what Russ describes there is just pretty doggone horrifying. Yeah, so we were talking about the 9/11 attacks, and we were talking about the Saudi relationship there. Here's the thing that I don't quite understand. What do you think, or do you draw any conclusions in your reporting with the information that you have? Why do you think that this has not been the subject of major investigation, or has it and I'm talking about by federal authorities?
Well, Pat, as you know, throughout my career, I've worked for major news organizations of all types in all media in this country and around the world. And I've always been aware of a reticence to go beyond a certain point. And that is why I started Who, What, Why, which is a nonprofit independent organization, because I just was tired of that. You know, the reality here is, I was listening to your previous guest, and, that is a reality, that democracy in this country is largely a fiction. I happen to think that the presidential elections themselves are a kind of a carnival, a sort of a sideshow.
It sure appears that way. Rick Santorum just won another one. Where was that? I don't know. It doesn't matter.
It's very upsetting because we all only have so much free time to pay attention to public affairs. And so the more time, of course, that we spend on those kind of things, the less time we have to really educate ourselves in how things really work and why it is that we always seem to be oppressed, even though we are the majority in a purported democracy. And so stories like this 9/11 thing, as you know, in Family of Secrets, I go all the way back. I find that George H.W. Bush had a secret life prior to being CIA director, that he actually covertly was a CIA operative throughout his adult life. That has never been reported before. That's very disturbing to know that how little we actually were acquainted with a man who became president of the United States. Mm-hmm. I then found connections. Remember the story about how he didn't remember where he was on November 22, 1963. That got me interested in the Kennedy assassination. Spent years looking at that. I have 4 chapters on it. My point is, all of these subjects, you can't talk about them. In fact, if I may, let me just read you a quote here. This is from Terry Southern, who wrote the screenplay for Dr. Strangelove, one of the greatest movies of all time.
One of my favorites, yeah. After The Godfather. Yeah.
And there was a man who sent out a survey years ago about the Kennedy assassination. He sent out a letter back in the non-digital days, and he just asked all these sort of famous people, what do you think about the Kennedy assassination? And here's what Terry Southern wrote. He wrote, the absurdity of the Warren Report is patent and overwhelming. One has only to browse through any of the 26 volumes to know that it's insulting artlessness. It is as though they imagined that not one single person in America would take the trouble to look at the unabridged version. Well, the reality is we don't read those things. The media doesn't look at it. They don't have the time for it. They don't go deep. And so everything that we're hearing is curated. It is presented to us. It is abridged. And the question really is, who is put in those positions?
Yeah.
To decide what we hear. That really is what interests me. And I've been spending quite a lot of time, by the way, over the last couple of years studying the whole propaganda process. And I think we've talked about this before, Pat. Believe this is in Family of Secrets, about Operation Mockingbird. In the 1950s, the CIA had a program where they targeted and placed hundreds or thousands of their people in the media.
Right.
With the express purpose of controlling hearts and minds. And so we're not going to hear this 9/11 story, whether it's because there are people at those big media organizations who have some kind of connection to these repressive apparatuses, or just because they're scared. It's very, very simple. When you are in any kind of a position, it's sort of a paradox. It's almost the more powerful you are, the more powerless you are. You and I can say whatever we want, but when you're the President of the United States, when you're Oprah Winfrey, when you're whatever it is, you're under tremendous scrutiny and tremendous pressure, and you stand to fall a great, great distance, and you are not going to risk that.
Well, do you think that it appears that there have been some enormous stories that have been misreported, covered up, whatever, and then after several decades, perhaps the story comes out, the true story, what's actually been going on. Do you think eventually we're going to have that kind of information revealed? I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking about some of what I remember when shock and awe was going on, when they were right after the 9/11 attacks, when they made the decision to go into Iraq, when they made the decision to go into Afghanistan, and discussions were going on. They fingered Osama bin Laden as the likely perpetrator, the person who was likely the mastermind of these attacks. And then somebody was talking about bombing Iraq, and I don't remember why, but they said they have better targets. Do you remember that?
Well, I remember that supposedly Bush told Rumsfeld very early, start thinking about Iraq. And Rumsfeld was, no, we've got these other things we're going to focus on. I find that, by the way, that whole conversation, which is in Rumsfeld's memoir, contrived. I don't believe that either. You have to realize that what we're dealing with is a whole lot of people who are lying out of self-interest.
Right. But when they have meetings like that, meetings that are that crucial to the national security of the United States, aren't those things somehow recorded, or there's somebody writing it down, or there's some recording device to maintain that for posterity?
Unfortunately, I don't believe we have any right. So that's an interesting concept, of course, but that we don't have any right to that stuff. I mean, they still keep the Kennedy assassination records locked up. This rule, keeping everything locked up until anybody could possibly do anything about it, is long dead.
Yeah, right, yeah.
It's all absurd. If anybody listening, if this all seems absurd to you and like it's a game and we're all being manipulated, you got it.
Yeah.
You understand? That's the system. That's the only way you could have a country where 400 people have more money than the bottom 300 million. I mean, you can't do that any other way.
Yeah.
And so the rule is present this fake picture of a happy country where we're all in it together, shoulder to shoulder, all that stuff with the waving the flags and the patriotic music and everything. It's a giant scam. And I don't consider myself a radical. I mean, this is just what every journalist knows. I mean, we see this constantly, and we see how the whole political system is manipulated. And so what you're talking about in terms of these meetings, it goes deeper, you see, because let's say Hillary Clinton's in a meeting. What does Hillary Clinton really know? Hillary Clinton doesn't have any information of her own. She's a victim of whoever's briefing her.
Right, yeah.
And so the people who are briefing, I mean, there's a terrific book called The Secret Team by a guy who was in as a liaison between the CIA and the military, and he said, policy is not created at the top. In other words, Barack Obama practically doesn't make any decisions. This is what people don't understand. How could he make any decisions? What does he know about who should be Treasury Secretary? I mean, he doesn't know, you don't know, I don't know. We can't really in good faith make that decision on our own, so we turn to other people. Who do we turn to? Obama has all these people foisted on him in the process of the transition, and people say, oh, you should have this person, but who's he even turning to in the first place? And so Hillary Clinton, Colin Powell, whatever, they got people coming in telling them things, and there's often a consensus is created by people at middle levels, and these may all be people who have a kind of a common worldview. Some of them may know each other, they may have gone to the same schools, maybe Ivy League schools. Some of them were members of things like Skull and Bones and other secret societies where they have various confidential oaths to each other, and so there's much, much more going on to the process of how decisions get made that are never discussed in the media. It's really where my principal interests are these days.
Yeah. It's hard. I mean, it's really hard to get through it all, and especially when so many things are put in your path to block it. But the idea of transparency with our government, I mean, it's sort of a quaint concept because it simply does not exist. Hey, Russ, before we have to take a break, let's see if we can get a phone call in here, okay? Let's 808-0810, by the way, is the telephone number, 808-0810. I want to start with Byron calling from Belmont. Hey, Byron, welcome to KGO. You're on with Russ Baker.
I have a question that I've thought about all this time. What was in it for the Saudis to create the 9/11 tragedy? What was in it for the Saudis?
Any idea, Russ?
You know, first of all, I'm not saying they had anything to do with it. I mean, one of the things that I try to do is to be really, really, really careful. And the same thing in Family of Secrets, same thing on WhoWhatWhy.com. We don't jump to conclusions. It looks like they were involved in that. And then, the question, okay, if they were involved, what's that about? My sense is that the Saudi royal family, like wealthy people anywhere, are always afraid of being toppled. And the Saudis particularly are really under the gun. And they need some kind of an external threat that is so overwhelming that the world basically turns itself against that threat. And that threat, of course, is a kind of radical Islam. And so by creating this perpetual external war, the Saudis are the good guys. They're our perpetual ally, and they are absolutely crucial in our effort to go after the so-called bad guys who we are told did it.
Yeah, the war on terrorism. Okay, Russ, hang on with me. We're going to check in with the news, find out what's going on around us. And if you can stick with us for a bit longer, we've got a lot of calls coming in, and there's a lot that we have not yet touched upon that you've been writing lately, including including HR 347 and free speech. So we'll get to all of that when we come back. But right now it's time for us to check in with Paul Rogers. He's in the KGO Radio News Center. Hey, Paul. Good evening. I'm Pat Thurston. Russ Baker is my guest. Russ is going to be appearing in San Francisco in the morning. He's going to be at the First Unitarian Universalist Society. That's here in San Francisco, like I said. The address is 1187 Franklin Street at Geary. It's free. It's open to everyone. He'll have copies of his book, Family of Secrets, The Bush Dynasty, America's Invisible Government, and the Hidden History of the Last 50 Years. He'll have those there and available. And we'll put this on our website, too. If you go to KGORadio.com and you want to get this information, we'll have it there so that you can go on out to the event. It starts at 9:30 in the morning, 9:30 in the morning. Russ's website, again, is WhoWhatWhy.com. And we're talking about a lot of different stories that Russ has been following, stories that he's been investigating. Should we get another phone call here, Russ?
Sure.
All right, let's do. Let's go to Kurt. Kurt is calling from Fairfield. Hey, Kurt, welcome to KGO.
Hi, how you doing? Listen, Russ, I've also got some problems with the way news is disseminated. You have so many good points, and someone like an Alex Jones picks up on your points, quotes from you, and does a brilliant show on the Bush family going back to Prescott Bush and this and that. But in the next 2 weeks, you'll see Alex go off on tangents like half the gold is really missing from Fort Knox.
Yeah, he's crazy, yeah.
Yeah, and Rick Perry's really a bisexual with a cocaine problem.
Yeah.
And so, do you think that there's a conspiracy among people who are using people, and to a lesser extent Jesse Ventura and Alex Jones, that they're being used or they're deliberately being pawns of the military-industrial complex, that they have 1/10 truth and then throw out a bunch of crap but we can't tell the difference?
Yeah, so that you don't believe the things that they talk about that actually are true. I know that Alex Jones has done these really weird things about child sacrifices happening out at the Bohemian Grove. And you know, what happens there is bad enough. You don't have to do that kind of nonsense. What do you say, Russ?
I don't know. I mean, to me, the problem with so much of the media is that it's all a tabloidization process, and I'm including the corporate media, and I'm including a lot of these alternative ones, because there's so much pressure, to get those eyeballs, to get those clicks, to get those listeners, and so people have gotten to the point where they need this almost kind of diet of hysteria, and so things that are a little bit more nuanced. I mean, I can even see it with, when I talk about certain things. One of the things about WhoWhatWhy.com is that we like nuance, we like subtlety, we like stories that are a little bit complex,
right.
But that's a particular audience. That is not for everyone.
Yeah, but it should be for everyone. And this is one of the issues that I have. I mean, I think it's a huge issue that we ignore in America, that we have been dumbed down in terms of the news that we receive and then the news that we're able to consume. I think we talked about this, Russ, where we looked at the different covers on Time magazine, that particular issue, and I think it had to do with the Arab Spring. And the covers were unbelievable. When you looked at what was happening internationally, every international cover was the same, and it was a picture of a revolutionary with a gun, and there were bodies around and stuff. And the picture on the United States version of that magazine was a little cartoon picture, and it had to do with, are you happy, or is stress hurting you, or something like that.
Yeah.
And it was a slap in the face. But this is what's been going on here. I don't know if they think we're too stupid, or if they are making us too stupid to be able to understand the nuance. Without the nuance, you don't really know the story.
Well, that's right. You put that very well. It's a kind of and I love that song you're just playing, what goes around comes around. So, the public says that the media is disgraceful, and the media says internally in meetings, the public is disgraceful,
Yeah.
and we're all at fault, and we've got to break out of this vicious circle. So I have sort of volunteered, I got my hand up in the air. You can't see it, but my hand's up in the air.
I believe
volunteered, to start saying, okay, you know what, we're going to try to be rational here, and we're going to try to look at some of these things, and not be namby-pamby and afraid to take sides, but to kind of look at these things and say, we just want to know what happened. We just want to know what's going on here. And as you know, Pat, at Who What Why, I mean, we've looked at all these stories like what's the real story in Libya, where we really bombing the smithereens out of that for humanitarian reasons doesn't make a lot of sense. What was the real reason? What's the real story with Syria? What's the real story with Iran? What's really going on there? Do the Israelis really have a reason to be imminently, afraid of the Iranians launching a nuclear attack? And the interesting thing, of course, is that common sense is so absent in all of this stuff that if you think about it logically, you can get your answer in most of these things. You can figure out why people do or don't do what they do.
808-0810 is the telephone number, 808-0810. Let's go to Robert. Robert is calling from San Francisco. Hey, Robert, welcome to KGO. You're on with Russ Baker.
Thank you. Mr. Baker, I can only, in your discussion, something comes to mind. The great speech by John Kennedy where he says, the very word secrecy is repugnant to a free and open society. That resonates. I've heard everything from, well, that's why he was assassinated. Because my question to you is, to what was he alluding? What was he doing that when he made that speech?
Well, yeah, and the bigger question may be, why was he assassinated, Russ?
Yeah. Well, first of all, what he was alluding to, he actually was very clear in there. He actually said secret societies have no, the secret associations. I don't remember the exact words. You can go online. You can get that on YouTube, I think. But he actually says there's no place for that in a free society. He was talking about membership in these kinds of things, and he did not belong to Skull and Bones or any of those other groups, and he really thought that you should not have those dual loyalties. There is no question. I mean, quite a few. You look at the roster of Skull and Bones. I mean, quite a lot of those people were in government all the way through, including in Family of Secrets. You read about some of the people who brought Richard Nixon down were people around him who were members of these groups. And so, yeah, Kennedy, I think, was absolutely right that this is dangerous. Now, the larger issue of what happened to him. In Family of Secrets, 4 chapters on that. I don't have time here to really summarize all of it, but basically, the Kennedys did something that I don't think anybody before, except maybe Franklin Roosevelt and nobody since has done, is that they actually were trying to carry out their responsibilities to the American people. They were going after the criminal element, the real criminal element in this country, which we talk about the criminal element being people who steal and burglarize and so on, and that's true, but those are often people who are very, very desperate. But there's another criminal element in this country, and they are, it's not just the underclass, it's the overclass, and these are people who have every advantage, and yet they continue to do all of these unethical and immoral things, and the Kennedy brothers went after them. They went after all of these industries, and one quote that I really love is they say that, everybody hated the Kennedys except the people, and it was the steel industry, and it was the high-level people in organized crime, and it was the military, and it was the CIA, and it was the mining industries, and it was the military industrial complex, and on and on and on. All of these entities were tangling with the Kennedy brothers.
Yeah, and they wanted war. It seemed like they wanted war a whole lot more than what Kennedy wanted.
Oh, he had a very, very different sense, and this is just starting to emerge. There's still, I would say, the majority of the American people do not know the real story there of what was going on. I mean, Jack Kennedy, when he was a senator, he was quite in support of liberation movements. He said self-determination for all these countries. It's good for them and it's good for us. That was always his view. Now, he made some compromises when he ran for president, and he actually ran to the right of Nixon on Cuba and a few other things because he was trying to get elected, and it worked. And then once he was in power, as he saw what a lot of these people around him were like, and the power of the corporations, and he began resisting it. And he was only in office for a short time, but month after month he moved more and more aggressively to assert his democratic instincts. And by 1963, I mean, they all were just saying that this guy has got to go.
Yeah. We're going to take another break. We'll come back with more of your phone calls, and I do want you to tell us at least a little bit, hit on HR 347 when we come back, Russ. And let me remind our listeners not only that you can go to Russ's website at whowhatwhy.com, but also where he's going to be appearing tomorrow, 9:30 in the morning, and he's going to be discussing the news you don't get. It's about foreign policy, the economy, and power in America, and how the presidential race obscures why we can't get real democracy and meaningful change. It's happening at First Unitarian Universalist Society in San Francisco, and that's at 1187 Franklin Street at Geary, and it is free. 808-0810 is the telephone number if you'd like to talk to Russ right now, 808-0810. As I said, back to your phone calls right after this. I'm Pat Thurston on KGO. Good evening, I'm Pat Thurston. My guest is Russ Baker. His site is whowhatwhy.com, and we're talking about a number of stories that are on his site. Hey, Russ, before we get to, we've got so many phone calls coming in, but there's one in particular I really do want to talk to. This is Chris calling from Martinez. Chris, hi, welcome to KGO. You're on with Russ Baker.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
I just wanted to say that I just caught a piece of your show, and you mentioned Bohemian Grove.
I did.
And child sacrifices.
I did. Did they make some child sacrifices there under the Big Owl?
They certainly do not. I met 3 former presidents up there. I met Clint Eastwood up there.
Yeah.
It was the greatest experience of my life. I spent 10 summers up there, and it just is a blast.
Well, I'm glad you called in with that. The problems that I have with what goes on at Bohemian Grove, and this doesn't necessarily relate to Russ, but they float public policy there without public scrutiny. They have people who appear there, like Baker, when he was, what was he, Secretary of State, right? Mm-hmm. And
yep.
And he appears there, and he makes these speeches to all of these heads of industry, these big leaders, these big captains of these people who run the world, and they actually discuss public policy for the United States of America, but we don't have the opportunity to be there to be participants in that. And I have objections to that. That's just giving them way too much. It's not just, if they were just a bunch of men getting together peeing on trees, I wouldn't care. Russ, do you want to comment on that, or should we go to something else?
Oh, I don't know. I think you've probably done it.
Okay, let's go to Norma in San Francisco. Norma, hi. Welcome to KGO.
Hi. Yes, I was just listening to this, what do you call it, Wheels Within Wheels turn of paranoid literature. I wonder if Mr. Baker can prove any of these tenuous connections, these inferences. Sounds like the whole last century was a conspiracy.
Well, you know what? That's actually a good question, because people can say anything. But Russ, tell us the kind of evidence you're
First of all, why don't you pick up a copy of my book? It runs about 600 pages. It was published by a very well-respected, important publisher. It's got about 60 pages of footnotes. Every single thing I mentioned is documented in there with things from the actual people who are cited, letters, correspondence, minutes, declassified government documents.
So there's ample evidence to show that you're not just, you didn't have some wild dream one night and wrote a book.
See, some people don't know any of these things. The lady who's calling in has not read, obviously, that many of the right books, because there are hundreds of books, thousands perhaps out there, by people who worked in these institutions, were privy to them. I'm not alone. I mean, David Talbot's book, Brothers, Peter Dale Scott writes books. Lots of these folks write books with tremendous amount of scholarship and research going into them. The world is a much scarier place than we would like to think. And we comfort ourselves by using terms like that, conspiratorial, this and that. But, in fact, conspiracy is kind of a norm. All that conspiracy is it's several people getting together with some sort of motive that they choose to keep hidden.
Hey, Russ, your phone is doing some funny things. Are you on a cell phone?
I'm on a cordless phone. I think that the house I'm in only has cordless phones. Are you still hearing me?
Yeah, but it's a squirrely kind of connection where it sounds like it's windy where you are.
Oh, well, you know what? Let me see if there's I don't know if it's the phone. Let me see if there's another phone around here.
Okay, you look for one and let me grab another telephone call here. In the meantime, let's go to Jeff. Jeff's calling from Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Jeff, welcome to KGO.
Hi, thanks for taking the call. I love the show tonight. I wanted to ask Russ a question, two things real quick. One, his comment, how he can tie some of this in to Agenda 21, which is coming from the United Nations. I think the first Bush in office, the first person.
Oh, you know what? I'm so sorry. I just cut off everybody. Okay, listen. I think we just lost Russ. But you tell me, because we're getting toward the end of the program here, Jeff. What's Agenda 21?
Well, the Agenda 21 is something the United Nations come up with, basically wanting to basically take like the United States and colonize it. Distribute the people into what they call sustainable growth environment. You get the people out of the rural areas, move them into the communities. And a lot of people can tie some of the mortgage crisis into this theory. Now, it's a big
I have never, ever heard of that, but I'll tell you what, I wrote it down, and I'm going to do a little bit of looking into it tonight, just so I can convince myself, whether you're just a nut or whether there's something afoot there. Because, the truth is, a lot of times people tell me things that sound like they're just so wacky, and I don't believe them for a second. But then if I look into it, sometimes there's actually some there. So I'm not willing to say there's some there in terms of Agenda 21, but I will assure you that I will look into it and see what I can find out. We still don't have Russ back on the line with us, but let's go to Matt in Medford, Oregon right now. Hey, Matt, welcome to KGO.
Hey, Pat. Hey, Alex Jones. He is a good man. Let me explain. Some people mistake him for being a libertarian. They think he's a right-wing nut because he's from San Antonio, Texas, but he is, if you listen real carefully, he's a libertarian because he looks at the issue from both sides of the fence, and he's like Tom Sullivan and Lars Larson. He highly encourages people to disagree with him. He's a good man.
Well, okay. I appreciate your thoughts on it. I think he's crazy, and I think that a lot of the things that he says, there's no basis in fact. And including his commentary on Bohemian Grove. I know the woman. She is a friend of mine who he was with, who actually got him into the boho. So she knows what's going on there. And then he came out with this footage and just made this stuff up, just made it up out of whole cloth. There's enough to be concerned about. There's enough weirdness that goes on at the Bohemian Grove. You don't have to make up child sacrifices, and that's exactly what he did. We've got Russ Baker here back on the line. The call that you missed had to do with Agenda 21. Do you know anything about that, Russ?
I've heard something, but I don't know much about it.
I don't either. So we won't go there. Let's see if we can get one more call on here, and then I want to talk with you about this other issue. This is Joe in Morgan Hill. Hey, Joe, welcome to KGO.
Hi, Pat and Russ. How you doing?
Fine, thanks.
Okay. In a nutshell, it's about money and control. In today's world, they just type in money on the computers, and then they give good paychecks to the CIA agents and all the rest that watch us. And at the same time, they give it to Wall Street and the rest. And that's all it is. It's just money and control.
Well, I would agree that sometimes it's hard to find the difference between the wealthiest in this country and our politicians, the people who are supposedly setting policy for this country. You want to comment, Russ?
There is no question that the power of power, lust, and of wealth is understated. I generally agree with this caller. It's not everything. Certainly to those of us who I think are relatively healthy, balanced individuals, there is much more to life. But if you look at many of these most powerful people, you look at a guy like Romney, it's very interesting because the New York Times was trying to humanize him, and they said, well, it's true he, has huge amounts of money, but he doesn't spend it. And this is supposed to make him out to be
that's real human.
That's even more warped because he spends his whole life amassing a tremendous fortune, throwing people out of their jobs, and he doesn't even enjoy the money itself.
Yeah, and when he refers to the $750,000 speaking fee as not really that much, that's then you know that he can't relate to us. Russ, we've only got about a minute and a half left. Tell us about H.R. 347 and free speech.
Okay, well, just very briefly, that is a bill that when we wrote about it on whowhatwhy.com, it was pending on the president's desk. He has since signed it. We go to the site and read that article. Just go into the search box and type HR 347. It's worth looking at it because some of these new bills coming down the pike are somewhat disturbing. It has to do with assembly and protest at places where the president and vice president is or may be or may have been. It's very, very general language. Worth studying and trying to understand where these bills are originating and why.
Yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly with that. I thank you so much for being with us today, Russ. And again, we'll give out the website address. It is whowhatwhy.com. And join Russ in his appearance tomorrow morning at 9:30. Thanks so much, Russ. Always a pleasure to talk with you and always informative and enlightening. And right now, I think we've got